Victoria Hartwell built her company on precision. At 59, she ran the largest architectural firm on the West Coast with the same exacting standards that had carried her through 30 years of breaking barriers in a man's world. Every detail mattered. Every minute counted. Every employee understood that. Excellence was not negotiable. So when she walked through the 23rd floor at 7:30 on a Thursday evening and found the night janitor sitting at a conference table folding paper cranes, her reaction was swift and decisive. "Excuse me," Victoria's voice cut through the quiet office like a blade. The janitor looked up, a slight man in his 60s with gentle eyes and calloused hands. Scattered across the mahogany table were dozens of origami birds, each one perfectly folded from what appeared to be discarded printer paper. "Ma'am," he said softly, beginning to gather the paper figures, "what exactly do you think you're doing?" Victoria stepped closer, her heels clicking against the polished floor. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Hartwell. I finished my cleaning early and I found this paper in the recycling. I didn't think—" "No, you didn't think." Victoria's jaw tightened. "This is a place of business, not an arts and crafts room. You're here to work, not to play with garbage." The janitor's nameplate read, Eli Santos. He'd been with the company for 3 years, Victoria realized. Quiet, efficient, invisible. Exactly how she preferred her support staff. "Clean this up immediately," she continued. "And don't let me catch you wasting company time again. Consider this your final warning." Victoria forgot about the incident until the following Tuesday. When her assistant brought her Eli's termination paperwork, he was found doing it again, her assistant explained. Making those paper things during work hours? Building management recommended immediate dismissal. Victoria signed the papers without hesitation. Rules were rules. Standards were standards. If she made exceptions for one employee, where would it end? That evening, she worked late again, as was her habit. The office was quiet except for the hum of the air conditioning and the distant sound of traffic 23 floors below. As she gathered her things, she noticed something on her desk that hadn't been there before. A single origami crane made from white copy paper perched near her computer monitor. She picked it up, annoyed. Eli must have left it before security escorted him out. Victoria started to throw it away, then hesitated. The fold work was extraordinary. Precise, delicate, perfect. She'd never seen origami this intricate before. Almost without thinking, she slipped it into her briefcase. At home in her Westchester estate, Victoria's world was quieter but no less controlled. Her son Thomas, now 15, moved through their evening routine with the same methodical precision she applied to everything else. Dinner at 7. Homework until 9. Lights out at 10. Thomas had been born with autism, and over the years, Victoria had learned to structure their lives around his needs. Routine was comfort. Predictability was peace. Words were optional. Thomas had spoken his first word at 4, Mama, and had gradually added perhaps a dozen more to his vocabulary over the years. He communicated mostly through gestures, expressions, and an intuitive understanding that often surprised even the specialists Victoria had consulted. She was reviewing contracts at the kitchen table when Thomas appeared beside her, home from his special school. He moved with characteristic quiet, settling into his chair with a book about birds that he'd checked out from the library 6 months ago and read countless times. Victoria glanced at her briefcase, remembering the origami crane. On impulse, she pulled it out and set it on the table. Thomas's reaction was immediate. His head snapped up from his book, and his eyes, usually distant and unfocused, locked onto the paper bird with laser intensity. He reached for it with trembling fingers, turning it over and over, examining each fold with the concentration of a scientist studying a rare specimen. Then something extraordinary happened. Thomas opened his mouth and spoke a word Victoria hadn't heard in months. "Eli." Victoria stared at her son. "What did you say, sweetheart?" Thomas continued examining the crane, running his finger along each crease. "Eli," he repeated, his voice soft but clear. "Thomas, who is Eli? How do you know that name?" Thomas looked up at her with those deep brown eyes that seemed to see everything and nothing at once. Instead of answering, he got up and walked to his room. Victoria heard drawers opening, papers rustling. He returned carrying a shoebox she'd never seen before. Inside were dozens of origami figures. Cranes, yes, but also frogs, butterflies, flowers, stars. Each one folded with the same extraordinary precision as the crane on her desk. And tucked beneath them, written in careful block letters on a piece of notebook paper, was a note. For Thomas, a friend who understands that beautiful things take time and patience. Keep folding, keep creating. The world needs more beauty, not less. Victoria's hands trembled as she lifted the note. Thomas, where did you get these? Thomas pointed toward the window, toward downtown, toward her office building. Did you meet Eli at my work? Thomas nodded solemnly. Then he did something even more remarkable. He began to speak in the longest sentence Victoria had heard from him in years. Eli comes early, before school, teaches me birds, says I have good hands. Like his grandson. Victoria felt the world shift beneath her feet. All those mornings when she'd arrived early at the office, Thomas had been there too, waiting in the lobby while she finished reports upstairs. She'd thought he was simply sitting quietly, reading his book. She'd never imagined. Thomas, how long have you been learning from Eli? Thomas held up 3 fingers. 3 years. The exact length of time Eli Santos had worked at her company. Victoria looked at the origami menagerie spread across her kitchen table, then at her son's face, more animated and engaged than she'd seen it in months. The pieces clicked into place with devastating clarity. Eli hadn't been wasting time during his early morning hours at the office. He'd been connecting with a boy who rarely connected with anyone, teaching him, caring for him, creating a friendship that had bloomed in the quiet spaces between Victoria's controlled world, and she had destroyed it with a signature on a termination letter. Victoria spent that night awake, staring at the origami crane and thinking about precision versus compassion, rules versus relationships. By morning, she knew what she had to do. But finding Eli Santos proved harder than firing him had been. He'd left no forwarding address with HR. His phone was disconnected. Victoria found herself in the unfamiliar position of needing something, someone, she couldn't simply acquire through corporate channels. Finally, her assistant suggested checking with the building's other cleaning services. Someone might know where Eli had gone. It took 3 days of calls before Victoria learned that Eli was working night shifts at a small office building in Queens, making barely half what he'd earned downtown. Victoria drove to Queens on Friday evening, something she'd never done before. The building was modest, tired-looking, nothing like the gleaming tower where her firm resided. She found Eli on the 3rd floor, emptying wastebaskets with the same quiet efficiency she remembered. Mr. Santos. Eli turned, and Victoria saw the exact moment recognition hit his face. His shoulders tensed and he took a small step backward. Mrs. Hartwell, I'm sorry, did I forget something when I left? Yes, Victoria said quietly. You forgot my son. Victoria had rehearsed this conversation during the drive from Manhattan, but standing in this fluorescent-lit hallway, watching Eli's weathered face soften at the mention of Thomas, her prepared words disappeared. I didn't know, she said simply, about the origami lessons, about the friendship. I saw you folding paper during work hours and I thought you were wasting time. Eli nodded slowly. I understand, ma'am. You had your rules. My rules were wrong. The words came out harder than Victoria expected. She'd built a career on never admitting mistakes, never showing weakness. Thomas told me about the lessons. He still has all the figures you made for him. And last night, he asked when Eli is coming back. Eli's eyes brightened. How is Thomas? Is he still reading that bird book? Every day. And he's been trying to fold new cranes using your instructions. They're not quite right yet, but he's determined. For the first time, Eli smiled. He has patient hands. That's the most important thing in origami. And in life. Victoria felt something crack open in her chest. Mr. Santos, I'd like to offer you your job back. With a raise. And with the understanding that your morning time with Thomas is not a distraction from your work. It's part of what makes you valuable. Eli studied her face for a long moment. And if someone complains about me teaching origami to a boy, they can discuss it with me personally. 3 months later, Victoria's office building had become an unlikely center of quiet art. Word had spread about the janitor who taught origami, and several employees had asked if they could learn too. Victoria found herself approving a small budget for origami paper, official company origami paper. Every morning before school, Thomas waited in the lobby for Eli to arrive. Victoria would watch from her office window as they sat together at a small table, heads bent over paper squares, patient hands creating beauty from simple materials. Thomas's vocabulary had expanded too. Not dramatically, he was still largely quiet, but with purpose. He could explain the difference between a valley fold and a mountain fold. He knew the Japanese names for different birds. He'd made friends with 2 other children whose parents worked in the building. Victoria kept the first crane, the one that had opened her eyes, on her desk. Sometimes, during difficult meetings or stressful negotiations, she'd touch its delicate wings and remember what Eli had written in his note to Thomas. The world needs more beauty, not less. One evening, as she was leaving late again, Victoria found a new origami figure on her desk, a tiny elephant, perfectly folded from purple paper. Next to it was a note in Thomas's careful handwriting, for Mom. Eli says elephants never forget, but they also forgive. Love, Thomas. Victoria sat down at her desk and, for the first time in years, allowed herself to cry. Not from sadness or frustration, but from gratitude. Gratitude for a janitor who had seen her son when she was too busy to notice. Gratitude for origami birds that had taught her the difference between precision and perfection. And gratitude for the word Eli, whispered by a boy who rarely spoke, but who had known exactly what his mother needed to hear. The next morning, Victoria arrived at the office early. She found Eli and Thomas already at their table, working on something intricate and beautiful. For once, instead of rushing upstairs to begin her day, Victoria sat down beside them. "What are we making today?" she asked. Eli smiled and handed her a square of yellow paper. "Cranes," he said. "Always cranes. They represent hope, and new beginnings." Victoria looked at her son, bent over his paper with absolute concentration, and at Eli, whose patient hands were teaching more than origami. She began to fold, following their guidance, learning that sometimes the most important business of the day happens not in the boardroom, but in the quiet moments when we choose to see each other clearly. The crane she made that morning was imperfect, crooked wings, uneven folds. But when Thomas saw it, he smiled the biggest smile she'd seen from him in years. "Beautiful, Mom," he said softly. And for the first time, Victoria understood that he was absolutely right.